To the Point with Kelly Dunn and Michael Williams.
But you don't have to and you should not raise taxes on the middle class and the poor. They are paying their fair share.
We also need to make sure that our people are educated for the jobs of the 21st century so that they can compete in this intense globalized economy.
Welcome to a special edition of To the Point. Kelly Dunn is off today. Joe Biden and Condoleezza Rice, the Vice President and the former Secretary of State, a Democrat and a Republican. This week, I had the opportunity to talk with both of them about major issues facing the country. The Vice President was in Coconut Creek telling seniors the GOP wants to end Medicare as we know it. That's a quote. We began our exclusive interview on that topic with Mr. Biden, who prefers a casual, stand-up style while taking his stance on the issues. Mr. Vice President, thank you for taking time to be with us.
I'm happy to be with you.
You talked today about Republicans wanting to end Medicare as we know it. With respect, PolitiFact, well-respected, said that such claims about ending Medicare as we know it or dismantling it were, quote, the big political lie of 2011. Scare tactics?
Political facts is wrong. Just look at the facts. The first plan they put forward said within 10 years they'd voucherize Medicare. Period. That's a different system. That's not Medicare as we know it. This plan talks about, the last one that's been offered, talks about being able to choose to get out of the plan, go into a voucherized plan, and people could stay in that traditional health care plan. The effect of that will be companies will be able to, and you can't blame them, cherry pick the healthiest of the elderly, the 68-year-old who plays tennis, and leave the 88-year-old in there who has serious problems. So the cost will go up. So it's simple. It is not the same plan.
Mr. Vice President, the Republican plan authored by Paul Ryan says, yes, listen, 55 and up, no change. If we don't do something about Medicare, it will definitely end because we can't afford it. Entitlements are breaking the bank. He offers a voucher system for people 54 and under right now. 10 years out, it would kick in. They say the problem is that Democrats aren't acknowledging that entitlements are the massive share of burgeoning national debt. And without change, massive change, we're going to go broke as a country. Your response?
They're partially right. But why are they then protecting the massive giveaway of $1 trillion in tax breaks to the top 2% over the next 10 years? You can't do both. You can't fix the Medicare problem, you can't fix the deficit problem, and continue to hemorrhage $1 trillion in tax breaks, over $800 billion of which will go to people who have an income over $1 million.
A huge amount of money, no doubt, and yet there are many nonpartisan economists and many Americans who say, listen, Republicans tend to come back to the rhetoric of we can do all of this with spending cuts and no tax hikes. And Democrats too typically come back to if we just tax the wealthy enough, we'll be done, and that there's not enough truth on both sides, that all Americans, including middle-class Americans, are going to have to look at a combination of spending cuts and across-the-board tax hikes if we're to rescue this country's financial position.
No, I think they're wrong. They're right in one sense. Either or is not the answer. That's why we put forward over $1 trillion in cuts to programs. That's passed. $1 trillion from us. We also got an agreement, and I negotiated the agreement with the Republicans. They would cut another $1 trillion. $1.2 trillion, you know that special committee? What'd they come up with? Zilch. So we believe you have to do both, but you don't have to and you should not raise taxes on the middle class and the poor. They are paying their fair share. It's the top that aren't paying it. So the answer is cut programs, and we've done that, even good programs that we can't afford, and make the tax system fair.
Briefly, Mr. Vice President, on Monday, the Supreme Court will begin to take up a constitutional challenge to the individual mandate and the Affordable Health Care Act. I have people, when I post this question in social media, ask this question: why should Americans be compelled by the individual mandate to buy health insurance in 2014?
It's a little bit like asking, why should every Floridian have to have liability insurance for his automobile? Because everybody drives. Everybody needs health care. And guess what? When people don't have health care, they still go to the emergency room. They still cause your health care bill to go up. They cause everybody's bill to go up. That's the reason, and I believe the Supreme Court will find the mandate constitutional.
I want to ask one last question. The President talked about it eloquently this morning. A young man, 17 years old, Trayvon Martin, shot and killed in Central Florida. You know about the national furor that's erupted. President Obama said, if I'd had a son, he might well have been or look like Trayvon Martin. We need to take it seriously. What do you say to Floridians in the country about this case in the larger sense? I know the DOJ is investigating, but what are your thoughts?
First of all, the Martin family, I marvel at their strength. I've lost a child, not by a gunshot, but I've lost a child, and there's nothing as profound as that, number one. Number two, that's why we've called in the Justice Department to do a thorough investigation, and to the credit of the state of Florida, they have set up a commission to look into this, including your existing gun laws, and whether they played any part. And I think that this will get us to the bottom of it. It would be inappropriate for me to comment on the detail why the Justice Department is doing this investigation, but it warrants an absolute and thorough investigation at all levels, local, state, and federal, and also warrants a review of the existing laws that may have contributed to this tragedy.
Lastly, can you win in 2012 without Florida?
Oh, I think it'd be awful hard, man. I don't plan on doing that. I think Florida, once again, is going to be a pivotal state, maybe the pivotal state.
And you've already had to swat away rumors about 2016. Will there be a Biden run for president?
There'll be a Biden run for vice president in 2012. That's the only thing I can tell you for certain.
Mr. Vice President, thank you for taking a few minutes with our audience on WPTV. We appreciate it, sir. And coming up next, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice talks about Afghanistan, Iran, and the problems facing our education system when we come back. Opportunity to talk with Condoleezza Rice this week on a wide array of topics: Afghanistan, Iran, and what she calls a national security issue right here at home, education. When I caught up with her, she was visiting the Boys and Girls Club of Palm Beach County. She serves on the group's national board, and I began by asking why the Boys and Girls Clubs are so important to her.
I believe that these clubs are places where kids have felt safe, they have felt affirmed, they can see a future in which adults are going to help them find themselves, and they're going to have successful futures. And so I'm a big supporter of the movement. And this club is known as one of the flagship clubs because of the extraordinary support that it gets in the area.
You've talked about education as a national security challenge. Talk about that.
We are one country because we have a common ideal, and that is that it doesn't matter where you came from, it matters where you're going. And our coherence as a country rests on that being true. But the only way that that's true is if there's access to a high-quality education for every child, and no matter where they come from, what their circumstances are. And we will not be secure, we will not lead if we are not a coherent country with the confidence that that brings. But it's broader than that. We also need to make sure that our people are educated for the jobs of the 21st century so that they can compete in this intense globalized economy. And these days, 75% of the people in the United States can't even qualify for military service. And so we have some very devastating problems ahead of us if we aren't able to address the sad state of K-12 education.
Briefly on other domestic and international affairs, the fiscal challenges this country faces, how big of a national security challenge is that? Oh,
the fiscal challenge, the debt that we can no longer afford to keep borrowing, the entitlements that seem to be running away. Yes, these are major issues because they come to the core of America's economic health and strength, and your economic health and strength is the foundation for your national security and for your national leadership, your human potential and your ability to employ your people. And so these base economic problems, these fundamental economic problems, the debt and the entitlements are very much a threat also to our national security.
You said recently that the biggest challenge to the United States is really itself, a U.S. that potentially goes bad. How did you mean that?
I mean that while we do have other countries that are becoming important in international politics, if the United States does what we do well, innovate, create, our people have a sense of a better future for themselves, but particularly for their children, then no one can outcompete us internationally. If, however, we continue to borrow money that we can't afford, if we don't educate our people, if we don't remember that we are a country of immigrants and that immigrants enrich us and make us stronger, then we are going to erode our very common core strengths. And then the United States will not lead.
Dr. Rice, how do you view the GOP presidential race, long and drawn out, and We've heard that, as always, your name surfaces. Would you be interested in being a vice presidential candidate? To both of those questions. First, your view, and second, would you be interested in being on a ticket?
Well, my view is that the Republican Party will come together around a nominee, and probably relatively soon. We forget that primaries have this character. There are challenges. That's not a bad thing, because I think it helps the eventual nominee to be a stronger candidate. But I'm quite certain that we will, and then that person will find a very good vice presidential candidate, but it won't be me.
It will not be Dr. Condoleezza Rice. No interest.
No, I love policy, not politics, and I know what I do best, but I will support the nominee, obviously.
Lastly and briefly, war-weary Americans, many are saying, especially after the alleged massacre in Afghanistan, time to come home. Is it time to leave? Is Afghanistan a success or failure? Your thoughts and concerns there?
I know that people are tired, but we have to remember what Afghanistan looked like 11 years ago when we were attacked from that failed state by al-Qaeda. And we've made a lot of progress in rooting out terrorists there. The Taliban, which was in charge and was executing women in stadiums for the most minor violations of Islamic law, no longer in power. We have time in the next couple of years, the 2014 timetable that we've set. I wouldn't have set a timetable, but since we have, let's use those 2 years all in to further erode the Taliban's capability, to train the Afghan security forces so that they can prevent an existential threat to the Afghan government, to help the Afghans get more decent governance, particularly in the provinces, and to help to stabilize Pakistan and to do away with those terrorist safe havens between Afghanistan and Pakistan. That we can do.
And Dr. Rice, last question on Iran. Are we past time? Is time running out? Can a military showdown be avoided as it regards their nuclear ambitions?
Oh, I think we still have time for diplomacy to work, but time is indeed narrowing. The window is narrowing very much, because the Iranians, we cannot allow them to get a nuclear weapon, and both Presidents Bush and Obama have said that. We have to mean it. The President has to have a military option that he is prepared to use, and the Iranians have to know that he is prepared to use it. But we do have time, because the sanctions are biting, and if we're resolute, I think we have a chance to get the Iranians to change course.
Dr. Rice, thank you for spending time with our audience on this Channel 5. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And our roundtable up next to take on the week's political issues. Back in a moment. Joining me now for our political roundtable, Brian Crowley, author of the CrowleyPoliticalReport.com, and George Bennett, political reporter for the Palm Beach Post. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. Sure. George, in a story you posted, you pointed out as a wedge issue, health care is there, that in 2010, the midterm elections, more than half of seniors voted against Democrats for Republicans because of that wedge issue. Do you see the landscape changing there? You heard what Vice President had to say.
Well, the Democrats did lose big time with seniors in 2010, and their hope is that the health care law, that the provisions in it, like closing the donut hole, like the no-cost preventive care, that those provisions will become popular with voters and especially with seniors and reverse that. So, you know, that's the big question mark, because they got clobbered with seniors 2 years ago.
More on health care. Monday, the Supreme Court takes up the challenge to the individual mandate, the requirement to buy health insurance in 2014. That could drastically reshape the political landscape, depending on the Supreme Court ruling this year. Talk about that, Brian.
Well, to borrow from the title of a recent movie, Game Change, it's definitely a game changer, whatever the Supreme Court decides on this issue. I mean, if the Supreme Court upholds the White House's position on this issue, the Republicans will make a lot of noise about that and talk about how they believe that the health care policy is going to do great damage to the country and to the economy, and that it's an unfair mandate. If the Supreme Court tosses out any or all of the case, then the Republicans will have a big victory to go into this election cycle with, and they'll be able to point a finger at Obama and say he was dead wrong and the Supreme Court said so. I suspect, and George may have a different feeling on this, but I suspect it'll be a divided opinion.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, the one thing that strikes me is every election, candidates try to stress the importance that the president appoints Supreme Court nominees, and voters, it's usually not a big issue. With a high-profile decision like this, whichever side loses, it'll draw more attention to the role presidents have in appointing Supreme Court justices.
And looking for the swing vote there. On the wider issues, you heard Condoleezza Rice talk about the fact that entitlements, the government spending, the exploding debt bomb, all of that affects national security. And that all goes to the health care debate and other entitlement spending. Talk about that. The GOP race has sucked the oxygen out of the room, but these are going to become fundamental issues. How do you see that playing out briefly, Brian, and then George?
Well, I mean, looking at the economy overall, which is what ties into the entitlements and everything else, I think up until this year, the Republicans were able to make a pretty strong case to a lot of voters, especially their voters, that said these entitlements are going to kill the economy not only now but in the future, and that this is a long-term problem. I think that as the economy has started to improve a little bit this year, that voters may be tuning that out a little bit, because they're feeling a little better about things, and it's hard for many people to look long-term at the big issue. I think the asterisk over all of that may well be gas prices, which bring people very quickly back to the core issues of how well they think they're doing.
Yeah, I think fiscal issues, I mean, when you get into numbers like billions and trillions, they're inconceivable numbers to people. What they're going to see is, what price are you paying for gas? How's the economy doing? Unemployment? I think those issues are always going to take precedence over fiscal.
Right. The big numbers. What kind of health care I end up with. This is a huge, involved, arcane language we'll hear from the Supreme Court, but ultimately affects all our pocketbooks. And it's which party, I hear you both saying, that can best take that and coalesce it into a pocketbook issue that will help decide this race.
Well, I will say that the White House, since the passage of the Health Care Act, has done a horrible job of explaining to people exactly what's in the Health Care Act. You can't sit 5 people down and have them tell you anything about what's in the Health Care Act. The Republicans, on the other hand, have done an excellent job of painting it as something that's horrible that needs to be killed.
I need to turn to another topic here with our remaining time, the Trayvon Martin case. You heard Vice President Biden talk about it. Two factors here. One, I want to talk about the Stand Your Ground law in Florida and how that plays all into this, George, right now, and then to the larger political, social, legal intersection that we're seeing on this issue right now.
Well, the Stand Your Ground law, I mean, first of all, I guess we'll have to see the facts of this case, whether this the guy that shot Trayvon Martin,
George Zimmerman, allegedly.
Right. Whether he was truly, whether this truly fits what the Stand Your Ground law was intended to do.
And I should say, not allegedly, he acknowledges it, but says it was in self-defense.
But whether the facts actually fit what the Stand Your Ground law was intended to do is, you know, Jeb Bush and Rod Smith, actually, the chairman of the Florida Democratic Party, who co-sponsored the bill, have both said that they don't think the facts, as they've read about them, fit, that this is not what the Stand Your Ground law was intended to.
But we're already seeing a committee that's going to, the governor said, we want to look at that, the Stand Your Ground law that said if you're fearful for your life, you can stand up in self-defense. Democrats are already saying that has backfired. Talk about the larger political, social intersection here that we're seeing with this issue in the state of Florida and indeed across the nation. Your perspective.
Well, I mean, politically, we don't know exactly how this is going to play out yet. When the fact, as George pointed out,
Nor
when
legally.
you have the chairman of the Democratic Party in Florida, you know, being one of the sponsors of the original legislation. You know, the problem with a law like Stand Your Ground politically is it's one of these laws that get passed to appease a certain group that really doesn't solve a problem. I don't know that anybody identified a particular problem, that this, you know, where we were having lots of people who were dying at their doorsteps at the hands of bad guys, and that we needed this law. You know, legislatures tend to do this all the time, where they pass some law just to appease some group, in this case the National Rifle Association. This wasn't a necessary law, and this is a consequence of this.
George, very briefly, though, it really reframes and resets in a campaign year the whole issue about race relations in this country, and we don't know where that will play out, above and beyond the tragedy for the Martin family, which everybody's talked about, above and beyond the legal implications. That's pivotal too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little crass, it seems, to talk about the politics of it, but you just
the president's speaking out on it. It's gotten to that level.
Right, exactly.
And he spoke in a very eloquent way.
So yeah, it's a wild card to see, you know, how that'll, when you stir the pot of you know, race relations and justice issues like that, you know, who knows where how that'll play out politically.
A reset of the issues in many contexts there. Gentlemen, thank you. Back in a moment. Now time for our Crowley closer.
Well, I'm going to predict some traffic jams on April 10th. President Obama will be in Palm Beach Gardens on April 10th for a fundraiser. He's also going to be that day in Golden Beach and Hollywood. So it's going to be a big day for Democratic politics in Palm Beach County. And I suspect he's going to add on a big public event that day as well. So watch the traffic reports on April 10th.
It's spring and the heat's building in more ways than one as the political season gains ground for all of these candidates. Florida, of course, pivotal as always. Gentlemen, as always, thank you both for taking time to be our guest. And thank you, as always, for taking time to be with us on To The Point. If you'd like to send us a comment about today's broadcast, go to WPTV.com and click on the political link. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.